The realm of St. Stephen was not at all ready to face the oncoming army of the Ottoman Sultan. King Louis summoned the noble banners in June of 1521, but it would take time for the army and supplies to gather. As for the money to pay for it, the treasury was almost empty. The Diet, held in early 1521, had consented to a scheme to devalue the currency in order to mint enough money to pay soldiers. But in June, emergency measures had to be taken. Extraordinary taxes were raised on the free royal cities, mainly because they had the money and couldn't resist like the other estates. When the Saxon cities in Transylvania objected, the king threatened them with loss of land, limb and liberties if they didn't cough up the cash. And when Cardinal Bakach, Archbishop of Esztergom, died on the 11th of June, the king ordered his men to enter the archbishop's properties and seize all of the late occupants' treasures. Around the same time, Louis's wife, Queen Mary von Habsburg, arrived in Buda, and the royal couple immediately set about begging for aid from the other realms. The queen writing to her brothers, the king to his uncle, to Rome and to Venice. He even begged King Henry VIII of England to try and reconcile the elected Emperor Charles and King Francis I of France, whose new war had become the central concern of European geopolitics. Only Louis's uncle, King Sigismund of Poland-Lithuania, sent aid in time, and even that was not much. At the end of June 1521, Sultan Suleyman besieged the fortress of Shabatz, while the Grand Vizier put Belgrade under siege with a lesser force. Both fortresses were under-equipped and undersupplied. Both lacked gunpowder, a trait also shared with other fortresses along the Danube, who were unable to stop the Ottoman fleet from sailing up to Belgrade. But the Ottomans still expected Belgrade to be a formidable fortress, and it does not appear that the Sultan had wanted to capture it on this campaign. On the 8th of July, word reached Buda that Shabatz had fallen, and it was assumed that the Sultan was about to cross the river Sava. However, whatever Suleiman's original plans were, they were scuppered by a prolonged flooding of the Sava, which didn't allow him to cross. And then word reached him that the Grand Vizier had captured the castle of Zemun, the last nearby castle that had supplied and supported Belgrade, meaning that the great fortress was now completely surrounded. Suleiman turned his army east and marched on Belgrade, joining the Grand Vizier's forces at the beginning of August. Should Belgrade fall, almost nothing would stand in the way of the Ottoman army marching up the Danube all the way to Buda. When the Sultan offered the fortress commander Weissban Olaf of Belgrade the choice between money and a torturous death, Olaf replied that they had plenty of Turks to eat until the king arrived. Suleiman was overly cautious and the Belgrade garrison overconfident. They had both made the same mistake. Both were expecting the king's army to show up at any moment. But the royal army had only left Buda in mid-July, and was slowly lumbering southwards, still gathering forces, while the war councils arguing and indecision caused delay. On the 29th of August, after 66 days of siege, Weissban Olaf surrendered Belgrade in exchange for safe passage for himself and his men. On that day, the king's army was at Tolna, over 200 kilometers away. The story goes that on their way home, Weissban Olaf and his men were killed by the Bey of Bosnia because of personal animosities. Having achieved a historic victory, Sultan Suleyman departed for Constantinople on the 18th of September. Around the same time, King Louis's army arrived at Mohač, and the War Council discussed potential attempts to retake Belgrade. But due to severe disagreements, the arguing lasted into October, when an epidemic swept through the camp and decimated the army, forcing the king to disband it. In search for a scapegoat for this disaster, King Louis punished the Ban of Belgrade, Ferenc Hedervari, for allowing the fortress to go undersupplied and not being at his post. The king relieved Hedervari of his office and confiscated his properties. But Belgrade was a royal fortress, dependent on the royal treasury, and this was not seen as a fair punishment, and resulted in a series of other fortress commanders handing in their resignations to the king, lest they be blamed for the loss of their undersupplied, undermanned, and under-equipped fortresses. An emergency diet summoned in November of 1521 raised taxes, again, this time even on the nobility. The money was to be used for financing of mercenary forces to be hired by the magnates. Allowing the king to have a significant mercenary force of his own, like his famed predecessor King Matthias Corvinus, was out of the question. Money was also to be used to fortify the defensive line, most importantly the fortress of Petrovaradin, or today known as Novi Sad, that was just behind Belgrade. However, the fortification efforts were impeded by raids. The Diet in November made no decision on attempting to take back Belgrade. Neither did the one in the spring of 1522. In late 1521, the Croatian noble Ivan Karlović was appointed as the new Ban of Dalmatia, Croatia, and Slavonia, and the entire western section of the border was now dependent on his ability and his purse, which was insufficient. And Karlović entered into futile negotiations with the king's guardian, George of Brandenburg, for his late wife's vast estates in Slavonia. The loss of Belgrade was devastating for the realm's standing in Europe. It confirmed what had long been feared, that the bulwark of Christendom was rotting, that the realm of Saint Stephen was the sick man of Europe. But Europe was not to act. It was occupied with the return of Habsburg influence to northern Italy and of the Sforzas to Milan. The realm had also lost its supporter, Pope Leo X, who died on the 1st of December 1521. He was succeeded in January of 1522 by Pope Hadrian VI, the first Dutch pope, and the last non-Italian pope for the next 456 years. And amidst all of this, the realm of Saint Stephen held lavish celebrations for Queen Consort Mary's coronation in December of 1521.